Okay, perfect. It's preparing, so it's loading. I will let you know once we're live.
Thank you.
Okay, we're live. Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Laura Montoya. I'm one of the founders of the Latinx and AI organization and the Excel AI Institute. We really appreciate you being able to join us for today's webinar, the first of 2026. Just for some history, we have hosted several webinars throughout the years. We're very, very excited about this one in particular, featuring Omar Flores, and introducing the Latam-GPT, a large language model made in Latin America for Latin America. Omar, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate having you here. And just a kind of a brief intro, as AI continues to change how we live and work, a big question is how we make sure that these technologies actually understand our regions. And today we're looking at the Latam-GPT, which is a new model developed in Chile. It was recently launched, and we'll be talking about why building this local technology matters, how we can bring that innovation home for our countries, and the massive effort it took to create what is likely the largest, most comprehensive data set for Spanish and Portuguese speakers. So to break this down a little bit, we're very excited, as I mentioned, to have Omar Flores with us. Omar is currently a senior visiting MLE at CENIA, which is the lab that has hosted this particular project, where he led the pre-training of Latam-GPT. He's also a co-founder for Latinx and AI and brings a vast background in natural language processing, having previously worked as a researcher at Twitter, which is now X, as you know, and he is originally from Peru. Omar has been on the front lines of this movement, and we're very excited to have him share the real story and the hard work and technical challenges involved in building this particular product. Welcome, Omar, and congratulations on officially presenting Latam-GPT in the last few months. Would you want to do a quick introduction for our attendees? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yes, that happens to me all the time.
It's okay.
Nice to talk to you. Nice to talk to you. Nice to see you after a while. We were briefly chatting before. It's
Yes.
great to be here. It's great to be back to be in touch with the Latinx in AI community as well. You already did a really nice description. I would just say that I am from Peru. I moved to US to do my PhD several years ago. Then I basically work in different labs, different research labs, like IBM Research, Intel Labs, Capital One, and also Twitter Cortex. Uh, we talked several years, Laura, about how we need more Latin American involvement in AI. Indeed, Latinx in AI is just in concordance of this message, right? So
Yes.
Latam GPT is something similar. It shares the same spirit. We often talk, okay, we need to put some hours to develop AI technology in Latin America. So I am already a year here in Latin America between Chile and Peru. And we are building this technology. We are trying to make it open source. We're trying to share the data, the code, and everything. So for me, this is just a continuation of this same spirit of sharing with Latin America and not being a spectator, but also to be a builder. Thank you for having me here.
Wonderful. And thank you for sharing the inspiration behind the technology and then really the mission, I think, of Latam GPT. We love to know also your experience of the reception of this new technology since its official launch, since you've been involved with it from the start. What has that experience been like for you?
Great so far. Sharing technical knowledge with a vast community of people is always a challenge. Some people in the research community understood very well the importance of having an open source model in Latin America. In other cases, you needed to talk about the use cases, the real examples, what makes different. Some people say, okay, we already have ChatGPT. Why do we need Latam GPT? We already have some vendors that give the technology for free. Sometimes when needed to explain, for instance, the strategic advantage of building this, of knowing how to do it, right? We can probably give you more details about that later in the following questions. But it has been a quite a challenge to share technical knowledge to different levels of the audience, but it's also a bless to share this type of news.
I can only imagine. I think that's wonderful, and it must be so exciting for you. I wonder if you could also share with the audience a little bit of how you came to be involved with this project. Obviously, you've had quite an extensive career journey, and I want to know like what brought you to this role, and particularly what brought you to working on this project.
That's a great question. I was working very hard for a raise, for a promotion, for a year. And then the company I previously worked was acquired. We were talking about Twitter at that time. And then I realized that my previous work was more related for optimization of money, optimization of promotions. But I needed this reset in my career where I really needed to find a purpose in what I was doing. So I was being a backpacker for 6 months in Europe, trying to find this purpose again. And then I was invited to join this project. The first time I was just given feedback to the project was so interesting and so big and so challenging. And then after I realized that this is basically where the purpose I wanted to choose, I joined the project. I start helping with the infrastructure, and then I start taking leading of the pre-training part of the project. And now it's becoming a more larger team. We have several parts for data processing, for pre-training, for post-training, recently for AI as well, for ethics and so on. But yeah, this is pretty much a summary of this journey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm sure that that is very inspiring as well to those in our community who are trying to find their purpose and think about how they want to approach that process, right? Whether it be working for a larger corporation, getting involved in a new project, or maybe starting a startup themselves. So thank you for sharing that. Since some of you probably already know a bit about this project, others might not so much. I'm wondering if, Omar, if you can tell us a little bit more about what Latam-GPT actually is and why it is so important for the team at Senia to focus on building a model with this level of regional context for the group.
Absolutely. Um, Imagine that we have two types of LLMs, right? We have like open source LLMs, and we have the concept of sovereignty as well, where you really want to know how a model is built. You really want to have control of the decisions that lead to the construction of the model, but also you really want to control the data that will feed into the model. Currently, we have a stack of AI when you actually define what levels of involvement you want to have. The base of this stack is hardware implementation, where you definitely have to build hardware or hardware accelerators. The second level is in the level of the architecture research. Many times we often have the feedback, you guys are not inventing a new type of transformer. And that's true. We are just reusing some of the architectures that we have available. But this is the second level of the stack. The third level of the stack is the foundational training of models. And the fourth level is the application layer. Historically, Latin America and many parts of the global south only live at the level of the application layer. Going one level up and actually going to training foundational models is just the right direction to actually have more decision power in the AI stack. Obviously, we would like to create new type of GPUs, we would like to create new type of transformers, but this is just one step in that direction, right? You cannot solve all the problem at once. In that sense, I think that's a really nice concept to know that this is the first step, and the first step is often the most difficult because you need to break a lot of momentum of different type of previous decisions that actually put us in that stage. So from that sense, it has been a really interesting journey. And what we are doing is just to create the first kind of step, and there will be more that will actually make this process even smoother. And the good part of this is that we are open sourcing everything. We're open sourcing the training code, the benchmark, the training data set. And the goal is to create a change, meaning that there will be more companies built on top of Latam-GPT. There will be universities constructing on top of Latam-GPT. people could actually make it smaller, more efficient, more accurate. People could create verticals. So this is just a project where we want to kind of dynamize the community that we have in Latin America that are building AI.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And your emphasis on the training and the data, I think, is what's so important here, right? As that first step of making it very region specific. I'm wondering if you can go a little bit more in depth on what exactly is the data that you're using to train the model on?
Of course, this is probably one of the largest contributions. It took us around 8 months to collect data from different countries in Latin America, at least 20 countries. And in many cases, we needed to to knock the door for each of them. I've been to the Congress of Peru talking to these people about the need to actually use data from Peru, for instance, but still I don't have an answer after a year. I talked to most of the media in different countries, like Peru, asking for data, historic data, not even recent data. And sometimes it's really hard to convince people. But happily, we found allies in the region as well. Universities, some parliaments like Colombia share the data under the open data regulations they have. And that helped us to create a data set that covers more than 20 countries in Latin America. But in contrast to previous efforts to collect data for training LLMs, we really have a data governance that put attention to who is the owner of the data, meaning that we have an agreement with each institution that is owner of the data, and we directly ask them, do you want to share the data? You want to share the data only for training the model? You want to also share it for the community or for researchers? So we give the maximum level of control to the owners of the data, even at the level of training the model, right? So we often give regular updates to these alliances, and that pretty much makes this a collaborative project. Rather than be really close around the construction of the model, we really open source everything that we can and try to be transparent as we can as well.
That's amazing. And I think such a great example for other people who are looking to build projects like this, right? And to source their own data. In a way, you're setting up a process, right? And explaining how you went through that as well. And then the type of data that you've trained on, is it mostly written text? Do you use any voice data, or what other types of data do you use?
That's a great point. We're talking about text data, as this is a version that only works with text. We are talking about annotating every document that we have with metadata, meaning that we want to cover different countries, but also different topics. There are very popular topics like movies and soap operas in Mexico or sports in Argentina. But there are other topics that are actually not well covered, like education in Nicaragua, for instance. For those cases, you need to take more effort to collect more of this data that is actually missing, or even use synthetic data for these scenarios. But having like measuring first and then having a plan of action to try to have a quasi-uniform representation of different cultures and topics in the region is really important. In that sense, one of the hardest problems is to how to define the data mixture. And often this information is not available in papers, where you really want to know, okay, what is the mixture of data, the mixture of topics, the memory replay that you need, such that the model will not forget what it knows, but it will also adapt to the region. This change of distribution, we're talking about a distribution of tokens, to create internal representations is really important. And often you only learn it by trial and error.
Wonderful. And so I'm wondering, you're talking about the kind of short-term memory or even long-term memory that the system has available to it. How have you tried to increase like the context window so that this particular system can better understand and refer back to regional differences that might be required when someone is interacting? You know, let's say they're from Mexico or maybe they're from Santiago, because there are differences, right, in the way people speak, in the idioms that they use, in the references they might have to a particular topic. So how is that done internally, just out of curiosity?
That's a great point. First of all, the data mixture is really important. if you have more data from one country, certainly it will answer better. Also understanding that you have different stages. You have pre-training where you inject knowledge. You have fine-tuning where you let the model follow instructions. And then you have some level of alignment where the model certainly also is aligned with cultural values. But talking to the knowledge, for instance, certainly even the order in which you actually introduce the data is important. For instance, if you have data from some mountains in Chile, certainly it's beneficial for the model to learn this type of information in the end of the training rather than the beginning. So we have different stages. Consider this kind of a pre-training and mid-training process, where in the pre-training process, we feed with genetic data, often a data that the model already saw before, but is needed to have a smooth transition toward a different stage. And in the last part, we actually have the longest documents. We have the data that we know that is very likely that was not part of a training process before. And also we have the regional data there. On top of that, we also increment the quality of the data with synthetic generation, where we start asking questions about the data that we know, but in different type of styles. Sometimes as question and answer, sometimes as descriptions, sometimes as paraphrases, sometimes as a reasoning process. So there are different tricks in the level of what is the order, what is the type of the data, and also what are the stages that you need. Again, this information is not available, so we didn't know at the beginning, but after several months of work, we kind of have a better understanding of what really matters to train a large these 70 billion parameters.
That's fascinating. So it seems like it's very much a scientific process, right, of trial and error that you've gone through. And then I'm curious, like for that context window specifically, like let's say I'm a new user getting on the product, how would it know like where I'm from, or do I have to give it that context? Do I have to essentially prime the model to know like I'm coming from a specific region, or I want references that are specific to a certain part of Latin America?
Great question. When we talk about an LLM, we're often talking about the distribution of tokens, right? And some tokens will be more relevant to you for your particular use case in Latin America. For instance, name entities. There are some name entities that are just in the tail of the distribution of an open source model that is not trained around Latin America. So that entity will be more frequent in our data set, and therefore the model will understand more details about this. You don't need to tell, I am from Colombia and I want information from Colombia. Just your prompt will guide the model towards this region of the latent space where this information lives. So the goal is not to answer to you because you are from Colombia, but the goal is to answer accurate information about Latin America as much as we can. But this is always connected to the content of the prompt as well, that as you said, will be part of the context window.
Interesting. So I'm wondering if then, based on the language that I use to interact with the system, it might derive some context about where I'm from or the type of information I would like back.
Correct.
Is that
We're
correct?
talking
Yeah.
about, absolutely. We're talking about dialects, for instance, right? There is a dialect
Yes.
in Argentina, there is a dialect in Chile, in the Andes, there is a dialect in the Caribbean. There is Portuguese also have some dialects. So the model will learn from the content based on the dialect, what are the type of topics, entities, and tradition events that may be more relevant to this dialect, for instance.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's really fascinating. So I'm going to switch focus a little bit because, I mean, you mentioned earlier that the idea behind this product is really to provide some level of like technological sovereignty, right? In your mission, to allow Latin Americans to have more independence and kind of own this process and the output from this product. So in that context, what does that term really mean for people in Latin America, specifically technological sovereignty in your mind? And how does developing a tool like Latam-GPT help our communities gain more independence in this digital age, rather than just relying on models that are built, from the global north?
For me, in a personal level, I believe that when you know how to build a tool and you can replicate the process, and if you open source this process with people, certainly you have more decision power. Even as a negotiating factor, you have more edge. What I mean is that if Microsoft or Meta wants to open an AI lab in Latin America, it will be a more beneficial or a better scenario if you have a project like Latam-GPT that was developed in the area. You have more evidence that this type of technology can be replicated in this part of the world. So having sovereignty is not only to control every layer of the stack that I mentioned before, but also to have control about how you take decisions building these type of things. And then for me, it's really important to open source this. If we do this as a closed project, the effect will be limited. But doing this as an open source and letting people to extend Latam GPT to make it better, more compact, more accurate, is just a way to make this happen. So many times I get asked, okay, you guys are not building technology, you're just are retraining a model. And when we talk about LLMs, when we talk about AI or ML models, the technology is not only in the architecture level. It's also in the weights, it's also in the distribution, in the internal representations. It's also in the bias, how you actually move the bias towards some entities and topics that are more relevant to your use case. When you talk about a model like Latam-GPT, you have a model that knows about Latin America, and therefore, even if you want to fine-tune this model, you will need less credits because this model already knows about Latin America. So if you want to get the same level of accuracy with other models, you will need more credits and more data. So there are different things that gives you more control. And for me, having the option to have a decision power, not being part of the market, but being some part of the builders that make this happen and provide an alternative to the market, for me, that's also sovereignty.
Wonderful. That is a really powerful vision, I think, for our region. And you brought up a good point as well in that response that removing bias is very important, right? And I know that's something you've talked about in previous talks that you've given with our community in the past as a personal issue that you've liked to tackle. So I'm curious, for this model, in the process of training it and developing it, and maybe now as a user, have you found that there has been bias that has come up in the system? And what tactics are you using, aside from just like getting more training data, to try to remove that bias over time?
I remember one of your previous talks several years ago where you mentioned that bias will always be there, right?
Correct.
Bias is just a way to kind of statistically let the model answer and have some prior knowledge about something. So it's impossible to remove bias. We will always deal with bias. Bias is not always a bad thing. Indeed, sometimes actually bias let you answer correctly different things. So how we deal with that? Basically to have more data from Latin America. Probably we'll release the largest data set in Spanish and Portuguese that exists today. And that will also promote a change in the region. How do we realize there are bias in other models or data sets? We saw different scenarios. For instance, we saw that many times the multilingual data sets that people use are actually translations from other language to Spanish. In that sense, you have a list of entities that belongs to other country, but are in Spanish. So the distribution of entities that you will get in your model will not be accurate, or will still be consistent with what you had before. Uh, so that for me, that's also really important because some of the documents that we are releasing, a large portion of them will be novel in that sense.
Yeah,
Because
that's
they,
really fascinating. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please go ahead.
no, 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 you're right. And just to wrap it up, um, in many cases also there is a bias related to the way how we evaluate this. And that's also quite interesting because we really want to fit in this international or global AI community. And for that, we sacrifice representation in terms of, versus having competence or like live in a set of standard benchmarks. without realizing that these benchmarks, which is probably the best way that we have for optimizing a model, we actually lose representation in order to have a standard way of measuring things, which is good. But we really need better ways to evaluate models, and Latam-GPT will also release benchmarks related to Latin America.
That was going to be one of my questions is what benchmarks do you currently use to kind of test your model and essentially understand if it is doing well against, other models that are currently out there, as well as maybe novel situations for data it hasn't seen in the past?
Correct. We use the regular benchmarks that we have in the literature, MMLU, we use HELA SOAC and so on. But also we are building two benchmarks for Latin America. One of them is actually more than 100K examples with pairs of question and answers. And some part of the team and some part of the project and some researchers are also building this type of benchmarks. So we believe that's going to be a very comprehensive way to actually measure the amount of knowledge related to Latin America. And of course, they will be released also in high events.
Amazing. I love that. So could you maybe take us a little bit more behind the scenes of the development process? Like, I know you mentioned one of the biggest challenges is essentially getting access to data and ensuring that you are curating such a large scale data set for Spanish and Portuguese. But what else has been kind of a huge blocker or, that maybe other people would face if they were trying to, build a foundational model from scratch?
First of all, understanding that building from scratch is not needed. We talk to other teams around the world that are also doing open source models. Usually, it's a very nice community, by the way. There are many countries in the world that are doing their own open source models. There are some efforts in Spain with Alia, Sea Lion, for instance, from Singapore, are also doing another project. So we learn from them, we exchange notes, and they told us that you can get the same level of accuracy if you do CPT, continue pre-training, rather from training from scratch. And you will get the same accuracy or even higher at probably 1/20th of the value, right? So first of all, one lesson, you don't need to train from scratch. Even if you train from scratch, you will probably need to do some tokenization, but that's not really needed nowadays. There are ways to actually kind of work around this type of process. And then I would say how to test the performance of your final model without training that model is a really important skill. Right now we have neural scaling laws that allow us to extrapolate the behavior of a model based on previous trains. We have equations to understand this. We know how many flops do we need for a certain number of tokens and given certain number of parameters. But more importantly, we can do a lot of experiments in smaller models, like 1 billion or 8 billion, and extrapolate this to understand the effect of learning rate, the effect of mixture of data mixture, and also the effect of different kind of curriculum learning that you will get. So nowadays, it's very easy for us to replicate this, but understanding all of this pipeline was actually very, very challenging in the beginning. And of course, we will be able to share all this learning in a technical report.
Thank you. And could you also tell us more about the team that made this possible? Because, companies like X or Google or Meta have thousands of engineers working on these types of models. So we're kind of curious, how was your team structured in Latin America? How many engineers or individuals were involved in the development of this technology? And how long has this process taken you?
Great question. We are a small team of young researchers and engineers. We are probably between 12 and 15 people only, which is a really small team for a large effort. Probably half of this team was devoted to data collection in the beginning, and now are doing different roles within the process of training. And these are young people. In some cases, we have people right after school that have all the same factor of learning fast. Something important is that a large portion of this knowledge for training an LLM is available in the literature. So you really need someone that picks up knowledge very fast and understand the math of different things very fast as well. And then the other portion of this knowledge is actually things that you learn in practice. I had my own share of knowledge coming from different corporations in the past, where I pre-trained different models as well. But in the end of the day, we are a really young team that are actually learning very fast. And that's why I believe that this process can also be replicated in other parts of Latin America. The knowledge is available, the willing to learn is also there, and we have the talent in Latin America for making that happen. You know that, Victor knows that, because we go to different conferences abroad, and we often find talented people from Latin America doing interesting stuff. Uh, Going to Latin America to kind of initiate a process like this is also important. So I also invite senior researchers that from Latin America that are working in other companies. I don't know, Hugging Face, Meta, Microsoft, and so on, to also collaborate with us, because in the end of the day, this could be probably a first step towards more that will come in the future.
Wonderful. And speaking of the future, it's so impressive to hear about the scale of the effort behind the scenes, but we really want to know what your goals are long term. So I'm curious about the roadmap for this project. Where do you see Latam-GPT heading in this year, and what are the major milestones the team is currently aiming for?
Yes, first of all, we want to wrap up the first version of Latam-GPT. Right now, we're doing extensive evaluations on the model. We also release the model. I don't have an exact date because that's not part of my decision, but we will first release the model, and then we will release the data, the code, and the technical report. And then once this is wrapped up, we will have another version of the model. We're still doing the planning of this, but it will be a multimodal Latam GPT, where, given early experiments that we already run, we saw even a higher need for bias mitigation. I give you an experiment for all of you. Just go to Gemini, or you go to any multimodal LLM, and generate an image from a woman from Ecuador or Peru or Bolivia or Colombia, and you will see a lot of touristic elements in those images. So how to disentangle the concept and also the traditions and the regional content without falling into stereotypes? I think that's going to be quite needed there, and also quite useful, because we often have screenshots and we also have multimodal data in our daily work. But that's pretty much the second stage of Latam GPT.
Wonderful. And I completely agree. I think making your product multimodal will make a big difference as well for the interest in use cases. I know it was one of the questions here in the chat is, how can individuals use Latam GPT? It sounds like once it is released, will it be available to just anyone, or is it primarily for business or government use? How do you guys see this product rolling out?
I believe that people will download it from Hugging Face, make it better, create a lot of verticals for different type of industries. I really hope people use it for education, or for even improving some of the institutions in Latin America, where they manage a lot of documents. The justice system, the way how entities in Latin America deals with documents. We have a lot of bureaucracy in Latin America. I don't believe we will solve all these problems, but having a model that works for Latin America will create a base for people to create infrastructure on top of this.
Thanks. So that's some good insight. So primarily to be released on Hugging Face first. Are there any plans to develop like a GUI platform where people can interact with it, through a basic user interface or their browser, like some of these larger models have?
We are in conversations right now. We don't have a solid update on that so far, because it's very expensive to have such infrastructure. It could be more expensive to have inference by a lot of people that even training the model. So if we had a budget, of course, we will have that available. But for now, probably the main difference that we have nowadays is the possibility of having different runs. In a small team and a small project like Latam GPT, you don't have the luxury of having multiple runs. You cannot validate all the hypotheses. So you need to be very creative how to actually use the credits in the most efficient way. So having a UI that let everyone to use it is something that we really love to have, but it also needs some budget for that.
Yeah, completely understandable. And so I'm curious, how is this project funded currently? Is Senia the main funder, and where do they get their funding from?
I don't have the entire kind of picture in my mind. So I say this is probably a question more for the director of the project. But I think there are some news on the internet, and there is some. What is the name of this? The name of this in Spanish is La Corporación Andina de Fomento. So I think this is where most of the budget is coming from. But I don't have the entire picture. I know there are several institutions, and even part of the government is also involved there.
Wonderful. And I imagine this would be a good way for others to get involved as well if they want to see this project grow in the future. Maybe they can contribute in some way, whether that be financially or maybe giving access to data. In your opinion, how can we ensure that projects like this don't just stay in a research lab, right, but actually translate into real world tools that are, individuals or local industries and the public sectors can adopt, with that in mind?
Great question. One caveat that one point that I wanted to mention before is that AWS also supported a lot with credits for this version of Latam-GPT. I don't want to skip this mention because they were really a huge a huge source of help for us to have credit for this version of Latam-GPT. So thank you to them as well. Can you repeat the question again? I just forgot the.
Yeah, of course. So simply, how can more people and how do you think people can ensure that projects like this don't just stay in the research lab, right? But how does this translate into real world tools that, individuals can use or local industries and the public sectors can adopt? Because I think people obviously, even from the comments in the chat, like people want to use this. People are very excited about the potential for this project.
Yeah, I think having this as an open source project is certainly helpful. In the end of the day, we also need use cases where people will find it useful. We also need to show that what type of use cases this problem or this model can actually be more efficient. So having this information is important and should be part of the technical report. But in general, since this will be part of Hugging Face, people will be able to use it through Olama, and they will also see by themselves if using Latam GPT could be, I don't know, more helpful to understand the context for certain use cases in Latin America. So I don't have a better answer just to say that having this as an open source alternative will certainly be helpful. And having the data such that people can replicate this also can be also a way to make it more accessible to people and eventually more useful.
Wonderful, definitely. So if someone, for example, wanted to contribute data or if they wanted to contribute to the code base, how would they go about doing that? Should they reach out to you directly, or is there some more standard process for becoming a contributor?
We have a process in place already. Let me send you the
Mhm.
link to latamgpt.org, which is the website of the project. You can find information there. You can find the email, the different levels of engagements that we have. Just as being a contributor, we also give you updates of the model. So we have monthly meetings where we actually give updates and receive feedback from the community. And that's a way for you also to contribute to where the project is going, because we take into account this feedback in order to improve the model over time.
Thank you so much for sharing that as well. And maybe we'll take some more questions as well from the audience since we have a little extra time. Feel free to put questions in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself as well and ask a question, you may do so in English or Spanish. We welcome you to feel comfortable and confident in asking a question. Does anyone want to ask a question to Omar?
Omar, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hey everyone, buenos dias. Omar, mucho gusto. Mario Carrillo. Nice meeting all of you online. A quick question here, though. One of the biggest, and perhaps you probably mentioned this, I didn't quite catch that at the beginning of the conversation. One of the biggest challenges that we have in the Latin America, it's so that the different, I mean, all around the world, but like specifically with different indigenous communities, we have different dialects, and within that, we have their own ways of, you know, managing their conversations. What is the how do you guys are planning, or is there such a thing in your horizon into like try to adopt or help the model learn all these different variations of these, what do you call it, like minorities at the indigenous level, communities in Latin America? So that'll be great. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Mario. I love the question. We have our current approach is that we have translators that allow us to translate from different indigenous languages to Spanish. We only support three languages at this version, in this version, Spanish, Portuguese, and English. Given Spanish and Portuguese the largest languages in the model in terms of documents. In the future, we realized that we need at least 3% of the data set to learn a new language, for instance. There are different languages in all Latin America that we will love to support, but that will also require a more expensive process to collect this data. Either using translators or even using ways to actually record this in a better way. For instance, having access to multimedia documents that allow us to do translations could be a possibility. So to answer your question, currently we preserve the knowledge by doing translation or by training translator from one language to the other, in this case Spanish, such that at least the concept, the entities, and also the information there will be still preserved. But in the future, we want to support them as languages in the platform. So consider this as a work in progress, and definitely that's a priority for us. It's just we cannot solve all the problems in the first shot.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. And then I know some of my friends, I'm originally from Ecuador. Some of my friends will be attending the Ecuador, the upcoming conference in Ecuador. I'll put in contact with them. They have some strong interest on the finding ways to collaborate on this journey and learning more from you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Omar.
Love it. Laura and I will be there, by the way, giving a talk in Sala.
Yeah, I know. Gosh, as an Ecuadorian myself, I'm kind of ashamed. Like work didn't quite, I wasn't able to get everything together with my schedule and the work. So, but anyway, next time. Thank
Well,
you. Appreciate it.
feel free to send a note in LinkedIn. We can grab a coffee if you have time.
Awesome. Thank you, Omar. Appreciate it.
No problem at all.
Yeah, I had a question kind of following up on Mario's question. Omar, ¿cómo estás? Mucho gusto. It's been a while. This is Victor. Can you hear me?
Of course I can, man. How are you?
Kind of in similar question as Mario, but maybe not so much indigenous. As a Salvadorian, I know that we use a lot of slang or maybe, mixture of native language with Spanish. So I know that you're going to try to gather more data, but how do you plan? Is it just more data to expose the model into maybe, and I'm sure El Salvador is not the only one. There's slang in all our countries, right? Very regionalized. How do you plan to address that challenge, right? Where it might not be where a translator could easily detect what the user is saying because it's very regional and colloquial. How does that lexicon, how do you think that would be solved? Muchas gracias.
Gracias a ti, Victor. Thank you so much for the question. I believe there are different approaches, and we are still exploring all of them to see what makes more sense. For instance, using synthetic data is a very important step. However, synthetic data doesn't work in the same level of hallucinations in all the languages and in all the contexts. So how to ground a synthetic data generation on existing documents without hallucinations is a quite interesting problem of research. And we are doing a lot of experiments in that area, for instance. What model to use for that is also quite relevant. Qwen has shown to be a quite nice alternative. And also some existing models already have a good support for that. So in that sense, probably what is missing is what is the level of extension, what is the extension of documents that you need for that without hallucinating. Also, do we need to solve this at the level of pre-training or at the level of alignment? That's another problem. Alignment or instruction fine-tuning is more designed to reshaping the distribution, not to change the distribution, because you only shape the distribution with a lot of data. But perhaps things like that could be kind of corner cases that needed to be into account. And in that sense, probably you need less data at that stage. For instance, one part of the model is related to understand that is Latam-GPT. Because one of the most common questions is who built you, or what is your name? And we understand that without considering this a particular corner case, the model will not answer that. So that's kind of patching some kind of gaps of knowledge in the model. And if we understand that there are some cases where we need to patch with slang in order to make the model more representative, that could be also another way to kind of target some particular pieces of knowledge. Having said that, I think that's an open question right now in the AI community, and we are still exploring all these ways and trying to find a better way to have a more reliable model.
Hi, Omar.
Hey, Pamela.
Hi, Lara. Nice to meet you. Welcome. It's a really good effort, and I think it's really important this project. So, congratulations and thank you, Lara, for hosting this space. I'm from Ecuador, and the question is, ¿qué podemos hacer para poder sumar a este esfuerzo, ¿no? Entonces, what can we do to join this effort? Because I think it's really important, and I know my colleagues from Ecuador, for the US, help you to giving you information, but what else can we do?
Great point, Pamela. If you go to Latam-GPT/n/resources, I just sent the link in the chat, and you will see that we have a system called CopuChat. Copucha in, I think, Mapudungun, which is an original language in Chile, means conversation. So CopuChat is designed for people to interact with an LLM, which is not a Latam-GPT, but allow us to capture real data related to Latin America and use that as part of the evaluations and also the model training. So if people want to collaborate with data, they can directly chat with CopuChat around Latin America, right? Around the food in Ecuador, around the mountains in Ecuador, around the traditions in Ecuador, and that will be part of the training data set in the next version or in the next stages of the model, which are actually happening very often. That's one way. You can also send an email to us saying, you know, I am part of this institution and we have data, and CC also some part of the institution that have the decision to kind of sign a contract with us. And this contract is basically the plan for data governance, right? Where we tell you, you know what, this is what we do with your data, this is how your data is going to be used. Eventually, this will be open source. And then that's another kind of institutional way to interact with us. And also, we try to always take into account the feedback of community. So if you can just send an email saying, what are you doing? How can you help us? It will also be a good way for us to interact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and it looks like we have another question in the chat as well. So Indira says, what are the technical capacity constraints and logistical challenges associated with designing, training, deploying, and maintaining a large-scale LATAM-specific GPT class language model? And who are your partners? I know you mentioned already getting access to enough data and potentially also compute power. So that's how AWS was helpful. Are there other constraints or capacity or logistical challenges that you think are important to discuss?
Absolutely. We have data capacity at the level of storage. Having a storage in the cloud that allow us to kind of store this data is very important. I would say also it's unbelievable the level of instability that you have sometimes in the cluster, meaning that you are training a model with 128 GPUs and one of them fails to create the checkpoint. And then when you want to reconstruct a checkpoint, you can't, and the model will slowly fall down. So this level of kind of errors that you could have related to a communication between hundreds of GPUs or is really interesting. And often we don't have this information in the papers, right? But talking with friends that work in this company, they always tell me that it's really crazy how many things could fail when you actually sync up so many devices at the same time. Having said that, probably the most difficult logistic challenge is related to how to take decisions uh, in the data mixture process, meaning that how to measure the importance of every document uh, in the sense that it will kind of have an influence in the final model. So you have kind of a pipeline where you have data collection, you have filtering, you have pre-training, post-training. So what is the impact of every decision in the pipeline in the final evaluation of your benchmarks is something quite interesting. And sometimes you need a lot of experiments to understand, okay, this is what I need to change in the pipeline in order to have the best available result. So I think those are the things that come to my mind related to challenges that we saw during training of Latam-GPT.
So do you kind of adjust those weights yourself for each document, or is that something that's done ahead of time in the pre-training?
We took decisions as hypotheses, and then the problem is reduced to measuring those hypotheses. And the best way to measure that is not with perplexity, is not with validation loss, is with the benchmark. The benchmark will tell if what you did in the past is good or not.
Okay, interesting. So I see we have some hands raised as well. Arturo, I believe you were first, if you would like to go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Omar. Hi, we met on November. Okay. How are you? Well, related to what now you said about training and the difficulties, I was wanted to hear your opinion if whether this, like, for example, distributed training, like not having a huge GPU center, because maybe in Latin America, of course, there are less than in the US or other countries. You see future on that, or you see that it would be, as you said, more depending on the community, how we develop all these verticals, open source, or that maybe LATAM should put resources in, I don't know, doing these distributed training efforts instead of huge centers. Yeah.
Great point. I would say it's really difficult to pre-train a model for Latin America, even for countries, because you need a budget for that. However, it's easier to do fine-tuning. You need less number of GPUs. You can do LoRa on a 70 billion model with probably 4 or 6 GPUs. In that sense, you have adapters and you only change the representation of those adapters. So in that sense, I believe the importance of Latam-GPT is to have a common base from which you can actually do LoRa on top of this for different verticals. So, however, having said that, I believe that countries should actually invest more in infrastructure. I always tell them that, the third revolution was related to building bridges, ports, infrastructure, physical infrastructure. This next revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, is related to create digital infrastructure. If you invested in optic fiber before, if you invested on fast internet before 10 years ago, now is your time to invest in GPUs. Now is your time to invest in clusters that will allow you to create platforms, but these platforms will be models. And these models will actually make the governance of your own country more efficient. So I think there will be more clusters. Countries are investing more, but I think they are investing more in other parts of the world. If we talk about Global South, I think India is investing more than Latin America, even though they belong to the Global South. So who is the responsible for this? I think it's our authorities. And they really need to understand sooner or later, hopefully sooner, that this is important for the development of Latin America.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think Marco also has his hand raised. If you'd like to go ahead, Marco.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Laura, for organizing this space, and thank you, Mark, for being there. Well, I'm glad also to have contributed a little bit for the development of this project from Ecuador. So when Laura asked you, Omar, about the biases of the model, I made a joke. I posted a joke there that the model is biased to Latin America. But actually, that raised a question about, okay, how did you avoid for the model to be too biased, to have enough knowledge about the world to make it useful, actually? Because the idea is that the model understands people from Latin America better, but has capabilities of covering information of the whole world. So that's my first question, and I have another one, but I would like to go with that first, please.
Sure, great question, Marco. Thank you. Good to see you here. I would translate this into the following framework. I believe that this is connected to the notion of forget versus adaptation. How to avoid catastrophic forgetting in capabilities that the model already was good at in the base model versus being adapted to new use cases. This is the way how we are approaching this problem. We have a lot of metrics that allow us to see if the model is performing worse or better in previous or past capabilities. Capabilities related, for instance, to translation, to summarization, to I don't know, to understanding other languages and so on. In that sense, for me, the main insight that I can share with you is that the learning rate is probably the most sensitive parameter there. How to find the better learning rate that allows you to kind of navigate this frontier between forget and adaptation is quite important. The data mixture is probably the second most impactful parameter. The order of the data is also quite important. And of course, what base model you use is also relevant. With all in mind, in the end of the day, it's really important how you measure the performance of your model. If you actually use different metrics or different benchmarks, you will end up optimizing or validating or rejecting different hypotheses. And in the end of the day, you wanna solve the most important problems, but you cannot solve all the problems because of the what is the name of this law? The law of the free lunch theorem. If you actually try to find all the problems at the same time, you will find the not so optimal solution for that.
Great, thank you. And second question is that now that we know how to develop a model, a large language model, what do we need to develop a new architecture? Something that is completely new regarding knowledge, regarding infrastructure, data, and all the things, all the ingredients that we need for that. And well, now that you are coming to Quito, I hope to see you here in person, and of course, we will be happy to have you giving us a talk in my lab. So thank you very much for the space, and well, I hope that you can give us some insights in that second question.
Thank you. I will be happy to join you, Marco. Thank you for the invitation. So Senia is developing really nice research that is published in NeurIPS and also ICLR related to new type of transformer models, for instance. The way how this is happening is at the level of smaller models, right? We're talking 1 billion or 8 billions. So we have really nice experiments related to that. What by we I mean Xenia, and some researchers of Xenia have found. I believe that similar representations could also be developed in other parts of Latin America. So the key for that is to do research, but with smaller models first, and then validate that in larger models, doing alliances with some institutions like Xenia, or even with other companies. However, you need kind of a pipeline in place for supporting this. So I think it's important. It's important that researchers like you and your students definitely invest time on this. But the key is to kind of um, question the foundations of our existing solutions. For instance, why do we have this number of heads, right? Why do we have this group query attention? Why do we have flash attention? Kind of questioning the foundations of this allows you to kind of have more hypotheses that could actually be more impactful rather than doing small changes. Latinx in AI has these workshops, these amazing workshops around the most important events. So definitely that's another venue to kind of validate your proposals or your research with a larger community of AI in the world. So I would say it's a process. You cannot directly invent the next transformer, but at least for Latin America, I would say it's kind of a process where you start small, you open source it, absolutely. You see the engagement from the research community and start creating ties with other institutions that have the CPU power for that. As new versions of Latam-GPT will come in the future, we are really open to try new ideas from the community. I mentioned the new transformer that we are developing at Xenia, and we have plans to include that as another process, no? So I would say there are venues, there will be more in the future, but definitely we have kind of several steps in the process, in the process for making that happen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco.
Thanks for the questions. Since we are at time, I would like to just give you the opportunity, Omar, to wrap up with any additional message that you have for researchers, students, and engineers in our audience today, and also that'll be watching on YouTube later, that might be inspired by your work and want to contribute to this ecosystem, or also just generally are inspired and want to work on their own projects. What would you like to say as your final sign off and goodbye? Oh, you are muted.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I was thinking about the spirit that is behind Latam-GPT, and it totally reminded me when we met several years ago with Luis and Pablo, right? Luis Serrano, Pablo Castro. We met several years ago asking ourselves, how can we help Latin America? It was probably 10 or more years ago. Laura was doing other things, I was doing other things, and we kind of formalized this as workshops for the community in San Francisco or in the Bay Area. Then we formalized this as a proper workshop for natives, and we were surprised when they accepted that as a diversity workshop. But in the end of the day, the first question is still the same. How can we help Latin America? And Latam-GPT is one way to help. Latinx in AI is another way to help. I just wonder how many great ideas will come from you that are listening this talk for helping Latin America. I mean, there are different ways to help. Talking to kids in school to study computer science, promoting the research in Latin American data sets. As Marco said, create foundational research from this part of the world. Helping students, creating more graduate programs for doing research in AI. So I believe we all need to collaborate. We all have great ideas, but it will always start from the same question. How can we help Latin America to be part of the AI community? At that time, we dreamed big with Laura, Luis, and Paulo. There were more people as well. And I would say we will always find support from the community. But if that support is not translated into actions, it will not change anything. So that's probably my last message. Doing Latam-GPT is great because it will translate with an action and will be consolidated as a model that people will use. If we don't take actions, everything will still be the same, even though we may have good decisions for changing the reality.
That's a wonderful message. Thank you so much, Omar. And thank you again for joining us, taking time out of your day to share this project with the community and your expertise with us, of course. So thank you everyone as well in the audience for joining us and for your attention. We really appreciate it. As was mentioned, Omar and myself will also be at Sala, which is coming up very shortly in March, where we will both be talking separately about different projects we're working on in Quito, Ecuador. So if you are able to join us in person, that will be an amazing event. And as Omar shared, there are many opportunities to get involved with the Latam-GPT project, or of course Latinx AI. If you're interested, please do follow up. We would be happy to hear from you and to connect both through our website as well as LinkedIn. We'll also, if with Omar's permission, post the links to the Latam-GPT website in the YouTube for anyone who will be joining us via YouTube as well. So I hope everyone has a good rest of your day as well as a great weekend, and we'll be seeing you again soon at the next session for Latinx AI.